one of the games that I personally enjoy playing are like Total War games, simulation games, City Skylines, Factorio. I like those kind of games. However, Total War is kind of weird. If you don't know about the Total War games, basically these are like top-down kind of battle simulation games where you're fighting wars and stuff. It's a good fun. In the course of this video, you'll see kind of what it looks like and how it works. But recently, they released a game called Total War Pharaoh. Now, you guys know me. I am like a huge simp for anything ancient Egypt related. Anything ancient Egypt related, I'm obsessed. I'm putting the video we're gonna watch in chat right here. So you'd think I would be all into this Total War Pharaoh game, right? Wrong. This thing is a bit of a disaster. The game has been it's been received very, very poorly by the community. And one of the reasons for that is because Creative Assembly, the developers, have a track record of, let's just say, aggressive monetization. So you can see responses have been mixed. The game doesn't look that bad. I mean, this is typically what a match will look like. So you have like your encampment, and then you might be the attacker. So you have all of your units, and then it's like an actual war game where you're playing through it with different units trying to make stuff happen. And it can be really, really good fun. The thing is, the way that they price these games is insane, okay? They are some of the most heavily monetized piles of garbage you've ever seen. So if we go to like Total War Warhammer 3, this released a little over a year ago, like a year and a half ago. And this was one I was excited for. You guys know me, I'm a Warhammer nerd. I love it. They got like the big custodies and like all sorts of stuff. But I like me some Warhammer. But look at the DLC. This is pretty much all the DLC you need to have the full game. $263 of DLC on top of the $60 for the base game. So you're expected to spend like 320 bucks to get the full game. And it's clear when you play these games that like it was built around having all of this, and then they stripped it out because they expect you to just pay up and do that. And it just sucks. It sucks. And so they released Total War Pharaoh, and shocker, the response has not been that great. And Creative Assembly, the developers, are kind of freaking out a little bit. So this is sort of a post-mortem from the one and only The Terminator channel. I posted the video link in the chat, and in the stream clip, we'll have it linked in the description box below. Send some love over their way. But I think they do a much better job of describing all of this than I could. And they have a way cooler logo than me. Mine's just my stupid face.
Is Creative Assembly's next major historical game. It's developed by the Sophia team, whose previous work include the Rome 2 DLCs Empire Divided and the Rise of the Republic, as well as the Total War Saga games Thrones of Britannia and more recently Total War Saga Troy. Despite these having mostly mixed reviews and mixed success, it's generally accepted that this development studio within CA releases polished, well-made games that end up being pretty good value. Now, I've personally had access to Pharaoh for about 3 weeks now. I've spent over 50 hours playing 4 campaigns, so I think I've got a lot of experience to make a thorough review. In this video, I'll be...
And man, it's such a bummer that this game, as you'll see, is not very good. Because I like everything about this aesthetic I am giggly about. I love it. You want to know how much I love it? I was about to say I'm creaming over and I stopped myself because that's gross. But now I said it anyways. So here we are.
Be talking about whether Pharaoh is worthy of being the definitive Bronze Age game it says it is, whether it's a challenging, replayable, and historical Total War, and whether, with all of that in mind, it's worth buying for the ripe standard price of $60. So let's get started. Set during the late Bronze Age collapse, Pharaoh takes place in a period of roughly 50 years in which
I wish this was so good.
Thriving cultures like the Mycenaeans or the Hittites were suddenly destroyed or abandoned. There are a variety of theories out there. This is a very interesting time of human history, but it's generally accepted to have happened due to a combination of changing climate circumstances, social upheaval and civil war, disruption of vital trade networks, and the invasion of a group of migrating people called the elusive Sea Peoples. Egypt.
The elusive Sea Peoples. My understanding was it was probably mostly trade route stuff. Like once trade routes are cut off, you kind of have to figure something else out. You know, you got to figure it out.
is one of the cultures that survived this cataclysm, and
Oh, a pyramid PC case. Do they make those? I would unironically do that. I would do that today. Move everything into the new case. I would do
therefore
that.
is the principal foundation from which Pharaoh, as its name suggests, is built on. The Egyptian culture comes with 4 of the 8 playable factions, including Ramses, our main protagonist.
Driven by reckless ambition, Ramesses sees himself as chosen of the gods, destined to rule as pharaoh. Thus, he is well suited to forging ahead at full speed, achieving swift victories on his path to one day claiming Egypt's throne. Seti the brute, Tausret the strategist, and something.
Seti, the heir to the Egyptian throne, his wife and historically future pharaoh, Tausret, and Amenmess, the eldest royal heir and viceroy of Kush. The Hittites are also represented in this game with 2 factions, Shupilululiuma, the last king of Hat.
Okay, oh my god, Shupilululiuma. Okay, I know there's people listening like at work. Wherever you are in your world, in your life, just try saying this right now. Shupilululiuma. Supilululiuma. Hold on, how did he say it?
Also represented in this game with 2 factions, Shupilululiuma, the
Shupilululiuma. That's just, oh man, blah. Shupilululiuma. I can't. I'm gonna have a stroke. Okay, moving
last
on.
king of Hatti, and Kurunta, the usurper. Plus, we've got 2 Canaanite factions with Bay, the political schemer, and Ursu, who is a bit of a rowdy, mean-tempered antagonist. Having chosen your faction and starting the campaign, we're placed on a narrow yet visually stunning map, reminiscent of Total War Saga Troy.
Oh, I love it.
That stretches as far north as just shy of the Black Sea in the lush green of Anatolia.
Look at
and
that.
as far south as the arid desert lands of Kush or Nubia.
Look at that.
And this is where we see the first striking issue of why this isn't quite a definitive major Bronze Age game. The map does not go as far west as Greece or even Western Anatolia, and does not include the eastern kingdoms of Mesopotamia, both of which had huge, thriving cultures.
Yeah, kind of important. Kind of important. It's like having a World War II game, but you just totally ignore the Eastern theater, and then you also ignore like everything from Moscow. Like Poland to Moscow, you just pretend like the Eastern Front's not a thing. So like you have the Pacific theater and then the Eastern theater, you just ignore all of it. Yeah, it just wouldn't really work.
Cultures and dynasties which played prominent roles in the Bronze Age and were definitely impacted by the Bronze Age collapse. Their absence is at least a big disappointment, especially if you're here for a Bronze Age game, and at most it's a first indication that this isn't quite the major Total War game we've been told it is. But okay, let's accept that for a moment and just look at the game itself. The narrative opens up with the death of the Egyptian pharaoh Mereneptah, leaving a power vacuum, and eventually in your first 60 turns, multiple civil wars in which one faction leader with the most legitimacy at the end of the timer becomes the new pharaoh.
I like
legitimacy
that. That's
here
cool.
being the key word, as that's an accumulated type of reputation that you gain through victorious battle, through building monuments, through taking a position on this new court mechanic, and others. And as far as newish features go in Pharaoh, this was quite refreshing, and
I actually think that sounds kind of cool. You got to earn your place as Pharaoh. That's cool.
at least in my first playthrough was enjoyable enough to learn.
Oh, it's a future DLC, by the way. Oh, that's why they stripped out Mesopotamia. Remember, like I said, it feels like a lot of these games you have to spend $260 on DLC to get what the game should have been in the first place. Yeah, it wouldn't surprise me at all if they did that.
Learn the basics of and use to my advantage. Sophia has always delivered new campaign mechanics that add a meaningful layer of gameplay design, and this is a great example of that. Where the gameplay loop starts and ends in Pharaoh, though, is the multi-resource system first introduced in Total War Saga Troy. Every settlement either produces food, wood, stone,
like Settlers of
bronze,
Catan.
or gold, and that is your
This is
main
straight up Settlers
incentive
of
for
Catan.
how you prioritize expansion in the campaign map. And these resources are the main drivers of every other mechanic in the game, whether it's the court, the technology tree, or engaging in diplomacy. Everything has some sort of impact on how much of these 5 resources you own produce. Some sort of impact on how much of these.
Yeah, you got to get that sweet kush. Look at that. You got to get that sweet kush. Paradox is just as bad, if not worse, with their DLC. I think and this is just my personal theory, I think what this is with these types of games is just that they know that for a lot of people that love these kinds of games, it's all they play. Like, they are Total War fans, or they are, name any given Paradox franchise. They like those kinds of games. That's what they do. Or like, if you're like a fan of Ubisoft stuff, you're a fan of Anno, like whatever it may be. But a lot of these players will only play one of these types of games, and that's what they specialize in. And they have like 10,000 hours in them. I have a buddy who's super into what's it called? Something 4. It's like the World War II game, kind of like this. What am I thinking? Hearts of Iron. I had it backwards. Hearts of Iron 4. He, no joke, has like 10,000 plus hours in Hearts of Iron 4. And it's because it's pretty much all he plays. He has his little laptop. When he gets back from work, he plays that for a handful of hours, and that's all he does day in, day out. So for him, he can justify spending $25 on a DLC, or a total of like $300-$400 when all is said and done over the course of years, because it's what he plays. And I think that that's the same way they approach a lot of this. Is they're like, oh, you're a Total War fan, so you're going to put up with it, bitch. Like that's how they deal with it. And I think that that is just a really unfortunate reality that only holds true and steady until the community gets fed up, which seems to be what's happening with the Total War franchise as well.
5 resources you own, produce, and spend. This is essentially the foundation of the gameplay loop. You expand your territory, you produce more resources, you build big.
Yeah, I guess publishers treat it like a real life tabletop RPG. I don't know. Yeah, and I think that because they know a lot of tabletop RPG fans spend a lot of money on their hobby, they can justify making this stuff really expensive. Because they're like, you spent $100 on a piece of plastic for the tabletop RPG, you can pay $20 for a bunch of content in the video game version. I think that's how they approach it. And whether that's justified or not, I think is certainly up for debate. It's not a slam dunk like they think it is.
Bigger and more powerful armies to expand your territory, get more resources, and the loop goes on and on. But what CA Sophia are time and time again so good at doing on the campaign side of things is to add layers of gameplay that take the focus away from these repetitive loops. You've got the Ancient Legacies, which are special missions every culture can access, from building unique monuments to special interaction with your vassals. You get deities to pray to for an assortment of stat buffs and benefits, which, to be honest, can get quite complex. And of course, the biggest layer, the Bronze Age collapse. If various cities called Pillars of Civilization, which are dotted around the map, are destroyed, the condition of civilization worsens, so more frequent earthquakes or debuffs to resource production, and the wave after wave, of course, of dangerous raiding sea people's armies. Now, this all sounds really, really good on paper, and in my first campaign, I'll be honest, I liked that I had to spend more time than usual to wrap my head around it all. But it was in my second campaign that I started to see the cracks in this design, and where the mechanics I previously enjoyed started to become chores I just had to get on with.
And I think it's important to stress that for a lot of games, it's like, oh, you only noticed in your second run through these problems, so therefore they must not be that big of a deal. Again, for these games, like, you're expected to get hundreds of hours out of it. It's like saying if you played Diablo 4, you're like, my first run through, I didn't, my first character, I didn't have that many problems, but my second character, I realized all of this stuff doesn't work for subsequent run throughs. And it's like, oh, that's a huge deal, because you're going to be using second, third, fourth characters constantly. Like, that's one of the big things.
Suddenly, the rosy tint of a new Total War fell away, and I could see that none of the decision-making had any real opportunity cost or lasting impact. The mechanics that were keeping me interested just became repetitive, and the narrow scope of the game and its map forced me to battle over the same territory, fight the same characters, and destroy the same factions. What could help with all of this is a variety of playable factions with unique playstyles, but that's just not the case either. Ramses is supposed to have really high campaign movement, and yet all of the other factions, through outposts, through skills and deities, can get really high movement as well. Amun-Mes is supposed to be this gold-producing powerhouse, but that doesn't mean he can't access every other resource with ease either. In fact, being on the Nile, surrounded by the desert, that's exactly what he can do. Irsu is supposed to be this angry anti-Egypt faction, but the Canaanites don't have their own courts, no formable kingdom, and you have no marginal reward to raise and pillage versus just expanding out and developing resource production. Nothing tangible to force you to play a certain way.
Yeah, it's like this weird way of designing these games where everything is so generic. Like they're afraid of consequences or players breaking things. So they just make everything play the same. And I think the best example of this working fantastically well is with like, I think I can actually pull it up, is with Baldur's Gate 3. Because Baldur's Gate is one of those games that's like, yeah, break it. Go for it. Yeah, it's stupid and broken. Good for you. Like, awesome. Love it. Like this. Someone was able to instantly nuke a late game boss in Baldur's Gate 3 by using a weapon that has an affix called Blood Money that deals weapon damage plus 4 piercing damage for every 300 gold the target has. Okay, so really valuable targets you can do more damage on. That's cool. Well, they pickpocketed them and then snuck 87,000 gold into the boss's pockets and then one-shot them. Like, totally broke it. Totally broke it, but it was super cool. It's a creative way of dealing with it, you know? And I think game devs should own it and like welcome that challenge and be like, yeah, try to break it. Figure it out. If you break it, awesome. That's fantastic. And it's like building a playground and letting the kids play in it. But with some of these generic games in their design styles, it doesn't actually do anything interesting. It's like they're scared of the consequence. So instead, they just design everything to play the same and try to remove all of the potentials for breaking stuff. And it just kind of kills the fun too.
There's no real faction diversity here if there's no real incentive, no risk to play them differently. And so what that means is Pharaoh has basically no replayability. And what's worse is I realized that for a Bronze Age collapse game, this doesn't actually play like the Bronze Age collapse. The map visuals might escalate, cities might burn, and powerful sea people's armies may arrive, but I still have an abundance of resources. I'm still expanding my territory and running around with huge high-tier armies. It looks like the Bronze Age collapse, but so many of the other factions are still kicking around while I'm not just surviving here, I'm actually thriving. It just doesn't make any sense. I want to feel the pressure of a crumbling civilization, but sadly I don't. And then I started seeing other issues, maybe minor issues, but they all add up over time. The outpost system is nice to have again back in Total War, but it's just completely overpowered. Stat stacking feels like it's never been worse as I can zoom around from one province to the next in a single turn, and while campaign customization, for example, is another great interesting feature to have, I just found it incredibly frustrating to try and balance a custom campaign when the default state is so unbalanced already. Essentially, everywhere I look, from the tech tree to the deities, the buildings, it's all covered in really positive stats, and it feels like nothing I do can go wrong. I have no real ownership over anything, and nothing I do has any real risk or lasting impact. What I'm describing here is the strategic depth of the Pharaoh campaign, and this was suddenly thrown out the window because my only real incentive to do what Total War is all about, conquering your enemies, expanding your territory, simplified to that base gameplay loop of increasing my resource production. I couldn't...
Yeah, it's like, I think there's a balancing act because on the one hand, I think a lot of game designers have kind of forgotten to try and design games to be fun and instead try to design them around like monetization schemes. And in this case, it's not like you can buy today the fix for this. In like 2 years, once all the DLC is out, probably you can. But in this case, it just seems like they designed it around being played through once. And you have a good time, you play through it once. But then by the time you go and you hit your subsequent run through, you're like, oh, this doesn't actually work. This kind of is burning me out. This doesn't work. So overall, I mean, and I think the perception with Creative Assembly is that it's clear that there's a reason why they're doing this. They're doing this because they know that it's going to push people into buying the DLC and stuff. That's what they're doing. So Creative Assembly is kind of collapsing a little bit right now. And it's because of the negative reception around this. And the fans are just kind of fed up. So this next little tidbit is from Bellalore News. and posted 11 days ago covering the same sort of situation, but from the perspective of the business side of things.
Fun situation with the Creative Assembly. After quite a long time of concern simmering, it's really just bubbled over. We've had the cancellation of Hyenas, the whole story behind that, Voland doing some leaks from his sources, then Creative Assembly DMCAing him, that entire thing. Then Total War Pharaoh, of course, coming out and having, to be honest, rather pitiful numbers on Steam. All of this has led to a fan base that, be it the historical fans or the fantasy fans, I think have just about had enough. I've been playing Total War games since I first picked up Rome 1 back in like 2005. I absolutely have got a horse in this race, and I certainly get how it feels firsthand, how the pace of innovation for major gameplay features, the likes of AI, has just completely flatlined. Now, as a response to all of this, quite a few Creative Assembly staff have been getting rather leaky. They have leaked to Voland, people have been in Legend of Total War's chat, I've had an email, and a bunch of people in my comments claiming to be CA devs. There's stuff we've been able to corroborate.
That's really interesting. So I've always wondered about this sort of thing, like how these leaks start and how they, like what pushes somebody to leak. Because you never see huge leaks coming from the devs at like Rockstar. And I think it's honestly because everybody feels so thankful to be working on like GTA 6. Nobody wants to be the one that leaks it and is fired and has Rockstar drag them across the coals, right? So everybody is on their best behavior. Whereas you see a lot of leaks from sometimes like Ubisoft games, usually when the projects are having trouble or when, you know, they feel mistreated by executive staff, that kind of thing. Or we saw it with like The Last of Us Part 2, where contracted employees that had their contracts end and were not rehired in full-time positions, they became disgruntled and leaked a bunch of stuff. So in this case, it seems like the employees at Creative Assembly, some of which I'm sure are real, some of these are, I'm sure, fake, are probably very frustrated with the way that the company is handling the games now, because the people that are developing these games love them and don't want to see it go down this route. And it's not like they enjoy making bad games or lackluster games. They want to make the best games they can. And a lot of these people grew up playing them or played them back in the mid 2000s or whatever. And so they know what the games could be if given the right tools, time, development, all of that. And so I think, yeah, I think you're right, Shinobi. This is an act of rebellion, and it's really interesting to see.
So today it's time to bring everything together and to work out, is there any hope? What sort of things could we expect to change? And broadly, what is the future of the Total War franchise going to look like? In terms of quotes from staff, we're mostly going off what was said to Voland. In addition to that, I've been contacted by people and I've corroborated where possible. So overall, I do think that this is a fairly realistic picture of what is going on, at the very least, from the perspective of one camp at people at the company. As an example, if you were to take Blizzard Entertainment, a few people in the World of Warcraft development team have spoke to me, and I very much understand their frustrations. A lot of their frustrations match up with those of the player base. However, I also know that's a team of 700 people, and quite a lot of people on that team would not agree with the people who have spoken to me. So take it with a grain of salt. With that said, supposedly, Total War has essentially ended up becoming a real cash cow for Creative Assembly.
Thank you, Jules, for subbing on Twitch.
With Creative Assembly being basically the big, good, profitable studio for Sega. The franchise regularly...
Oh wait, subbed at tier 1 for 6 months in advance? Jesus Christ! Well, shout out Jules. Dilly, thank you, my friend. Appreciate you.
Is getting from 2 to 3 million copies per release. Here's the quote. Before Hyenas, I was told Creative Assembly was Sega's most profitable studio because of this. So basically, it's successful, but also, I mean, where's Paradox with their real-time combat in a grand strategy game? That basically means that they have their own little niche of the market carved out, and there's not really much in the way of hard competition to basically innovate. As an example, if someone came and did better real-time combat than Total War, a lot of people in the historical setting would actually move over, and to be honest with you, it wouldn't be too hard for them to be topped, as you'll kind of see as we keep on going.
It's true. I mean, there's people that love the historical settings and stuff, but I don't think at this point Creative Assembly has anybody who's like, no, I'm a Creative Assembly fan and I'm going to play their game over the others. Like, there are people for like Bethesda Game Studios like that, where they won't play other games because they need to support Bethesda Game Studios. It's really weird to me, but they are out there. Same with like Ubisoft. I know it's weird. they're out there. But it's also true, like even just Call of Duty versus Battlefield, there's people that even though the games are roughly comparable, they will stick to one over the other. They're like, no, I'm a Battlefield player, I've never liked Call of Duty, and I'm not going to support them. You know, it's just crazy.
Now, per an email that we received from somebody claiming to be a developer, and I did, look around LinkedIn and stuff, seemed to actually match up. Long-term planning around the creation of Shogun 2 was built around the idea that the Total War player base was not growing. Now, for anybody who was owned by a listed company like Sega, the lack of growth in terms of users is going to be a worrying thing. That means, well, how are you going to grow your revenue? Obviously by getting more money per customer. Since then, one fairly major thing did change, and that is access to the Warhammer franchise. I think Warhammer's probably expanded Total War quite a bit, so at this time around Shogun 2, we're mostly talking about within the historical niche, that fan base not growing massively. That being said,
yeah, that's true. I mean, also Warhammer fans are a great fan base to have as customers because, again, we tend to spend a lot of money on the hobby. And Warhammer people, like, Warhammer's their thing. Like, that's what they do. They play Warhammer. That's their hobby. Because it's not just one hobby. It's like you buy the figurines, you build them, you paint them, you assemble them. Like, there's many, many parts to it. And so it sucks up a lot of time.
That a lot of game discovery platforms, the likes of Steam, YouTube, etc., they're a lot more powerful than they were back in the days when Shogun 2 first came out, where yes, we were reading game sites, but also the likes of, say, buying an issue of PC Gamer.
Oh, I was going to mention this. So he mentioned that like the big problem is that because they're a part of a listed company, they are limited in expanding like the Shogun 2 engine because there's a lot of like money that goes into it. There's a lot of time that goes into it. And the only way you can justify pouring lots of money into projects is if it's going to have a return on that investment. And if that's only going to see continued revenues, not grown revenues, it's hard to justify that to investors and to executives. But, and let me just say, I think that's right. I think that's accurate. I would say it's still Creative Assembly's fault for not understanding that, yeah, it's not growing right now because the games are the same as they have been for ages. For like 20 years, they've been identical. Of course, it's not growing because it's not pulling anybody new in other than like Warhammer fans that are now like, oh, I can play an RTS. That's Warhammer. I think at the end of the day, they would still rather just play Warhammer digitally. I don't know why that hasn't been done yet. That seems like such a no-brainer for them to just hire some company to build that for them. Like, it would print money. Like, I just don't understand why they wouldn't do it. But I guess there's probably some reason out there. I don't know.
Were actually a fairly regular thing to do. Because of that, aided on by the rise of a lot of what Paradox has been doing, I do think that audience would grow. But again, I don't have the data, what would I know? Basically, the story is that management and Sega needed to make more money. They needed to improve their revenue per user. So what happened was an intent to have a Total War game every single year with DLC being attached. This is...
Shocker. We can't possibly improve the quality. So we need to suck more cash out of the customers, so we'll put out more games and more DLC. Right? Great idea, right? Everybody would love it. It's like these executives have no understanding that franchise fatigue is a thing. And also, when the quality drops below a certain point, eventually fans just stop buying your stuff. And this is the big thing with Total War Pharaoh. Like, I have expendable income. I could make a video on Total War Pharaoh and write off the cost of the game. I could do that. But even I, as an ancient Egyptian nerd, know that the game is going to be really lackluster and that pouring that time into it is probably not worth my time until the game is finished and complete, feature complete. And then I can buy it on a deep, deep sale during Steam summer sale and get all of it instead of for $300 for like 60. So I'm just going to wait like a year. And because the games have been identical for 20 years, it doesn't really matter. It's not like I'm missing out on the cutting edge new thing. It's like, no, it plays the same today, 5 years ago, 5 years from now, it's going to play the same regardless of when you jumped on it. So Who cares?
Per one of Volan's sources, the plan was to create DLC content with a dedicated team, quote, churning out reskins of old shit to peddle money for old rope. The intended games for this plan were Shogun 2, Rome 2, and more small historical games in familiar settings. Now, for those of us who are aware of those historical games, well, yeah, we pretty much know that's like Thrones of Britannia, which was pretty much just Attila. It did a few nice little innovations, but it was an Attila campaign expansion, let's be real. Of course, Troy then did that for, I think, was it Warhammer 2 that it spawned off? And then obviously Pharaoh is, I mean, it's kind of Troy again. That's what a lot of people have essentially realized. Most notably, though, smaller historicals basically means no Medieval 3, no, say, Rome 3, or another Empire-like title. It's just going to be those smaller settings. And what this essentially meant is getting more product out, basically more content. As, yes, Bill Gates wrote in the 90s, content is king. However, in the games industry, innovation is also content. You can only keep on pumping content out for so long until people just get sick of it, until the amount of problems accrue and you need to actually clear your technical debt, finish your problems, and innovate in the core of your game. And that essentially is the thing that has been sacrificed at the altar of very regular releases with a lot of DLC.
Well, and it's just like at this point with all these games, it feels like you're playing the same thing just with reskins, because you basically are. I mean, there's some systems that are a little tweaked and altered, but it's basically just the same thing over and over again. And it's, I mean, even just down graphically. I know graphics don't make a game, but there aren't even big strides in terms of graphics. Like they have done nothing to justify people spending hundreds of dollars a year on this franchise alone.
So, overall then, we've not really had space for expanding historicals. There's been no new space for, like, say, newer game mechanics. As an example, it said the naval battles in Empire took years to develop and basically could no longer be justified as a thing worth doing. Of course, you look at a lot of Total War games and they basically don't really bother with the naval bit as much. In fairness, some people love those, some people didn't. I certainly remember around the time Empire was coming out, I was fairly mind blown by just how impressive the feature was. There's been a lot of people looking for the likes of, say, a First World War title, which, you could sort of see from Fall of the Samurai, move up a little bit from that. Apparently, there have been some leaks and rumors that was at one point in the works. But again, any large leaps forward are essentially not happening per all of this. The historical side of their franchise has just doubled down on those smaller releases. Meanwhile, of course, the fantasy element of the franchise is there. Their intent was to license existing IP and to bring in new players. In addition to this, though,
it's really, I mean, it's bad when you're like, your only hope for growth is licensing new franchises and bringing them in with fresh player bases just from those other IP. Like, okay, we can't grow this right now, so I guess we'll license the Minions and we'll have a Minions RTS. Like, okay, well, we did that. All those Minion fans came over. Okay, what do we do now? Well, let's license the Hunger Games. Let's do a Hunger Games RTS. Okay, they do that. They're like, okay, how do we license what else do we have out there? Teletubbies, let's do that. And it's like, at some point, people are going to realize these are all the same game, just reskinned.
Basically, the console team were being given additional focus by management, despite a feeling on the Total War team that, quote, Total War paid for the console team. So from the emailer's perspective, right, Creative Assembly was never equipped to be agile or responsive. If there had have been pushback sooner, like, internally, then maybe they would have been forced to change. Maybe some things would have ended up being a bit better. But basically, Total War was raking in the money. There were problems. They didn't need to be fixed because the money was still coming in. It was a fairly captive audience. And when you have a content pipeline that is that absolutely stuffed full of content, guess what? It's a big ship and it turns fairly slowly. So the idea then of a company with a beloved franchise that is desperately trying to get its other plays to be successful, does that remind you of anything? This is where I can talk about a few things that I've heard from sources at Blizzard. Basically, if you ever wanted like player housing in World of Warcraft, any of those things, all very solvable problems. Essentially, the problem is Blizzard did not invest in their core technologies for World of Warcraft. They didn't invest in slicing away that technical debt until far too late, which then means you have a content team that feels like they sort of have their, their hands tied behind their back, not able to really make the most crazy, interesting, or just new innovative features because they're being held back by tools, by pipelines, by processes. And this is another thing that we see here. Because at the end of the day, if Total War is only getting 2 to 3 million sales, how do you move up to the next level? The answer to that apparently was Hyenas, which was allegedly Sega's most expensive title, costing $70 million and being an utter shit show from the perspective of its development, which has of course led to many people leaking. Okay, let's talk about the decision makers then.
I totally forgot about Hyenas, that this was even announced and stuff. Like, I totally spaced it.
One thing that's been clear as we've went across the various places that staff have been talking, be it my email inbox, Voland, and other people, and I would say, hey, if you are at CA and you feel like this is unfair, if you feel like you have some additional context, anything that would help get reality, get truth out there.
Oh yeah, the finals. Yeah, they actually sponsored me to go and try the game early this year. I don't remember exactly when it was, but yeah, they sponsored me to go to like an early access preview event and stuff, and it was super cool. I mean, I thought it was really cool back then. It had a couple of quirks, like it was all about destructible environments and stuff, and I thought that was awesome, but they only gave you like 2 grenades and like a single shot rocket launcher that took 30 seconds to reload at the time. And so all of my feedback was like, you have this amazing destructible environment system, but it feels like you can't really use it. It's this awesome system that you might see a wall collapse once in a while, but it feels like the coolest thing would be if entire buildings were collapsing, you know? And they said, yeah, we're working on that. We're working on that. So I haven't tried the recent betas. Hopefully they fixed it and gave you more tools and stuff. But yeah, I think it's really, really interesting.
Truth is what I'm interested in. Let me know. You can hit up tips@bellular.games and that'll land in my inbox. And yeah, we can have a chat. We can see what's going on. And if there's any major changes, obviously I'll update the audience on that. Okay, so the brand team essentially gets quite a lot of blame here. Essentially, the brand team is a sort of overarching production team who manage individual elements of a wider studio. It seems that each brand has a lead responsible for it. As an example, if we were to use Blizzard, you'd have a Warcraft manager, a Diablo manager, that kind of thing. Now, allegedly, these are the people who get most of the say in what's actually made. They're the people who go to Sega and actually do the pitching and come home with the big old sack of cash. Now, this is not a...
It's an important job. It's an important job. Those people probably make very good money. Very good money. But yeah, I can see why there could be problems. Like we saw this with Ubisoft and Assassin's Creed. You guys remember? I forget the guy's name. But there was a guy that was ousted as part of the like Me Too movement thing that happened at Ubisoft because he was kind of a prick, and he apparently did not, or maybe allegedly, reportedly, whatever, he did not want to have a female protagonist or have a canonical female protagonist for Assassin's Creed games because he said a game with a female character in the lead will not sell. It will be a failure. And so he shut down all of these ideas for female protagonists. Syndicate was kind of him caving a little bit, but he was one of the big decision makers creatively on the Assassin's Creed franchise, and he was pushed out. And now we've seen Cassandra is the canonical one for Assassin's Creed Odyssey, and then female Ivor, I think is the or Eivor or whatever, is the canonical version. And you know, now reportedly we're getting more Assassin's Creed games with female leaders. No, it wasn't Ashraf. It was a guy like 2 or 3 levels above him. It was a guy we never saw on stage. It was a guy you never heard of before. He was like an upper level like executive. He was one of Yves Guillemot's like buddies. Yeah, he's the reason Cassandra wasn't the only protagonist. Yeah. Because they pitched Cassandra as the sole protagonist, and he shot it down and said, no, you have to at least have a male protagonist because a female focused character or game will not sell, which looks pretty stupid now. But what are you going to do? But this is the problem with one guy being in charge of all the content for a franchise. It can go really well if they know what they're doing, if they know exactly what fans want. Otherwise, it doesn't end well.
New thing for a company. This is actually how the vision for a game is often created, right? Like the vision, the life cycle, the budget. The word specifically in the Voland video that was given was the Bible for a game. Yeah, your game's Bible. That is a very, very common thing across the industry. Go to any Gamescom, see people pitching their games. That is exactly the sort of thing that'll be going on. I mean, in 30-minute publisher speed dating, you're not going to whip out your Bible, but hey, you get the drift. The point here basically is that it's the big brand managers who are making a lot of these major decisions, right? And the allegation here is that this is why, partially, there's a lot of bad decisions. That these are basically people mostly concerned with top-level studio, essentially finances and that kind of thing. They're holding the purse strings. They're also the people who are trying to increase the revenue per user, per product, while then seemingly imposing some creative and production limitations as a result of this decision-making. Here's a quote. 9 out of 10 times, if there's a bad decision that's been received poorly by the community, it's driven by a marketing strategy. Intel modes in Warhammer, exclusive contracts with Epic. Remember Troy was just for free in the Epic store when it came out. That was bizarre. DLC price increases. Of course, that's been the most recent drama, other than Pharaoh.
Increasing prices of DLC, man. That's a bold move. Jesus Christ. I hadn't heard about that. Oh God. Wow. People are upset about our $10 expansion for this, and our this faction is $15. Okay, well, let's raise it all by $5. Like, whoa. That's bold, man. That's bold. Rari, this is Creative Assembly, the guys behind Total War. The whole company is kind of crumbling. Their fans are sick and tired of them, and they're trying desperately to figure out what to do. But Creative Assembly apparently is doubling down at the same time and refusing to acknowledge that there's any real issue going on, and that it's just players being whiny.
These are basically all things from this brand department, and it all tracks with the broad idea that they're not really increasing the size of their player base, therefore they have to monetize them more deeply, and this all basically comes down to risk mitigation, keeping that bottom line happy. I would love to know how much Epic Games paid them for that whole Troy thing. Now, there's one man who's came up in all of this, and that guy is Rob Bartholomew. It's quite interesting. He's the Chief Product Officer, and I imagine he's going to have a few awkward days at the office, because a lot of the staff who have leaked have talked about, disagreeing with him specifically, right?
Oh,
that
that's
he's basically
awesome.
being framed as the money man. Here's a quote. In company meetings, Rob used to present us with these charts illustrating game sales and how they compare to one another. The total sales of tentpole releases don't fluctuate much, so the key to boosting profits is to raise the average spend per player. Personally, I don't think DLC is inherently problematic, but it often feels like Total War DLC has become a rather cynical method of achieving this goal at this point. That's the sort of thing. Personally, if you said to me, hey,
It's really funny that they name him. They're like, my boss? Yeah, he's the dick. They're just like, just so there's no confusion, okay? It's him. It's that guy. Is this another case of microtransactions being increased due to the greed of the company? I'm not opposed, or I'm not surprised, my good sir. Yeah, it's also just like short-sightedness from the executives to think that you can increase the average spend per player and not see any negatives from pushing them to do so. It's one thing if Fortnite is like, yeah, we want to increase the average spend per player, so we're going to go and we're going to release this DLC that's normally $5, but we're going to put it on sale at $1. So then all these people that normally wouldn't have spent anything then spend another $1 for a cosmetic, and they're happy because they got it on sale, and we're happy because we made $1 we wouldn't have otherwise made. That's one thing. What Creative Assembly is doing is that they are building games with the intent of stripping out half the content just to sell back to you as DLC, so that you aren't just spending $60 on the game, but you're spending $60 on the game and $260 on DLC for everything. And I think that that's just ridiculous.
hey, here's a game that you absolutely love. We're going to make DLC for it for 5 or 6 years. In a way, I'd be pretty happy. It would be a bit like playing an MMO with the safety that, oh, your MMO is going to have 3 more expansions, loads of content updates, and you feel like you're not playing in something that's a dead end. Of course, once the ask of money to quality of released content or quantity of released content no longer makes sense, that's when, you're getting more money out of people, so obviously they're going to start holding you to a higher and a higher standard. But then the question is, what if this is happening at the expense of the long term? And I suppose this is where I get interested in things. Take a game like, say, Dark Souls, and I know it's the most trite thing in the universe to bring up Dark Souls in a video about gaming.
Atomic, good to see you, my friend.
Dark Souls, right? Pretty damn successful. Kept on going more successful. Elden Ring. quite a bit more ambitious, really helped to just, I mean, along with obviously that franchise becoming more known, Elden Ring definitely with like its scope, its marketing, its public positioning, it was able to get a lot more people interested in that type of game as compared to say a Sekiro-like game. So there's always that thing where like, yes, your game has got its, you know, its audience, but how are you going to bring that to the absolute next level? And I think the answer there is your Empire 2 or your Medieval 3 being genuinely a next generation ahead, right?
Right? Shocker, they're not going to do that. They're not going to do that. This whole thing is built around how, pray tell, can we milk people for more money while doing nothing differently? That's this whole standard, the whole conversation that goes on within these creative assembly offices. And it's a serious problem because the longer they wait to upgrade tools and stuff, the more clear this problem becomes. And it's a similar issue that BGS has landed themselves in. Like, if Starfield released in 2016, I don't think it would have felt that weird. I think it would have been like, oh yeah, it's a little clunky here and there, but it's pretty good. But instead, it's releasing in 2023. And we see all of these things that are really funky and clunky and the constant load screens. I mean, I pulled this up. If Bethesda made Spider-Man 2, this was from Shayon on X or Twitter. Okay. Load in. Okay. It just works. It just works.
We're aiming for a controversial 7 out of 10.
Yeah, but that's the perception. Once everybody has like played those games, we all feel like that's what it is. That it's all this like kind of lazily thrown together thing, and an outdated engine, and it's not that ambitious. It's just barely trying to do the minimum they need to do to get the game out, and it just is generally disappointing. He took my thing.